trial chambers can be really tricky in finding, fighting, and in figuring out what to do with this new ultra rare enchantment. So here's how you defeat a trial spawner without a single hit, where to find the secret rooms with the secret loot, and then we'll also turn on RTX to show you what the experience is like that way. The trial chambers are the flagship feature of 1.21, a new structure that is buried below the ground with the most structure specific loot we've ever had, and every single one of these items requires going in, but it's also an incredibly fun challenge. But it is a challenge, and so how do you make it less so? Here are 20 tips split up into 4 sections of dealing with the trial chamber, and let's start with the first and most important one, finding it. A single trial chamber is one of the largest structures you'll ever find, but to unlock all of its potential, you'll need to find dozens of these. This makes finding it very important, so I'll start by mentioning that the trial chamber map lies to you. That is a bold and dramatic claim, but it is the conclusion I've arrived at after loading up dozens of seeds to try and get into a trial chamber as quickly as possible, and let me prove to you how it is true by using my current record best. So on this random seed run, I spawned into one of the biggest jungles I've ever seen and decided that I needed to climb up and get the high ground so that I could look around. Is there a jungle temple? Answer looks to be no on that one. I could be wrong. There could be a jungle temple behind. Oh, there's one over there. Chat, jungle temple unlocked, and then maybe that way there's a village. The jungle temple is so great, not just because it's made of cobblestone, which will be handy for me right now, but also because inside these loot chests is one of the most valuable resources for this run. Okay, there we go. Oh, all the bones we could ever want, and then a few more too. I'm not kidding. If you're on the Bedrock version, bones are one of the most handy things for finding a trial chamber, but what's also handy about the jungle temple is there's some exposed redstone on the ground, which I do of course take before heading off to a village. And although I have to find some food along the way, thank you for existing. Perfect. That's food locked down for a little bit. I'm also pretty thankful that there's a village not that far away, and now that I'm here, all I need is a cartographer, which can be gotten with the cartography table, and then I'm just 3 ingredients away from a trial chamber map. This is one of the most important items in this update, but if you want to get your hands on it, you're going to need these 3 things: 120 paper, 77 glass panes, and a compass. Why do you need these 3? Well, 120 paper is enough to trade a cartographer up to level 2. You can't go very far without either it or a huge pile of emeralds. Then to get to level 3, where the Trial Explorer map is, you'll need 66 glass panes, except because the recipe for glass panes requires you to make them by the 16, it means you can either make enough for 64 glass panes, or you can overcraft them and get 80, which will give you an extra 1 emerald, which is perfect because combine that with the 5 from trading paper, and boom, you've got enough for a Trial Explorer map. So this is my first tip. Use these ingredients. You can either have paper or sugarcane, and you can use that to make yourself some joy. As another pro tip, if you don't have enough sugarcane, because who can find 120, if you're playing the Bedrock version, you can use bone meal on sugarcane, which means if you find these bones, they basically equate to more sugarcane. But since while learning to speedrun, I tried to work out as many different routes as possible, I'll also give the tip for non-Bedrock players, although it also works on Bedrock, that if you want to find paper, you can just go to a cartographer villager chest, or you can go to a shipwreck. These don't have large amounts by themselves, but you might find it to be more fun or engaging than just going around looking for sugarcane. But if you go to a desert, you can find a lot of sugarcane very quickly, or you can just make a sugarcane farm, which, let's be honest, every world needs already. Once you give the cartographer his 5 paper trades and then 7 glass pane trades, you will be able to finally get your hands on any map that you like, but we're looking for the Trial Explorer map, which is 12 emeralds plus this compass. Boom, we're now ready to go. So immediately looking at this, you're going to get a very good guide of where you should go. It's always going to be hundreds of blocks away because of the cartographer's lies. We'll come back to those later, but for now, just keep in mind which of the 4 corners of the map that your little white icon is on, and then you can use the little arrow to work out if you're going the right way. I can see that my arrow is pointing diagonally, and so as long as I go in that direction, I will eventually end up on the map where my trial chamber is. And then you just want to go basically directly above the little trial chamber icon and dig straight down. The pro tip I always give if you care about your survival and don't have a way to avoid lava death is to dig 2 blocks at a time, but this is a speedrun, and so 95% chance of not dying in lava is fine for me, but if you want 100%, dig 2 blocks. Anyway, you can see after digging down at the exact point where the trial chamber icon was, I end up in the trial chamber in just 20 minutes, which is lovely. If you're curious about how the rest of the speedrun went, after doing a lot of testing, I found that actually the best way to get an ominous key is not to do a bunch of regular trial keys and hope for a bad omen bottle, but instead to loot the trial chambers, and that's when I found this bad omen bottle, and then made a decision about crafting. I'm gonna make myself a shield as my offhand item. Actually, I don't think I need it. I think it's faster. Less faff, just not to. Don't worry though, it wasn't that big of a mistake. It didn't really lead to anything that major happening. Oh, he's got so much health and so much knockback. Oh, I messed up by not making a shield. I messed up so bad not making a shield. I don't even have the wood anymore to make one. It's okay though, we all make mistakes, except for the cartographer villager, who is just a liar. And this is a weird tip to include, but it's one that's important because you might think that the trial chamber maps will point you to every trial chamber in your world, but that's not actually true. In fact, they don't even point you to the closest one or even the second closest. And I know what you're thinking, Toycat, don't you slander this guy. He might be American. He might sue you for this. How dare you make such frivolous claims? Except I decided to test something. I wanted to know if there was a trial chamber closer than 1,200 blocks away. And so here's the village from the exact same coordinates as earlier. And so if we go here and type /locate and then structure trial chambers, it should tell us that the nearest one is about 800 blocks away, right? Except no, it says it's 153 blocks away. Just over here. Seriously. Oh, in fact, wow. Look at this. There's a stronghold and an abandoned mine shaft and a trial chamber all hanging out about 100 blocks away from where that map was. It took me 23 minutes because in some part because I had to run so far away, but apparently Minecraft trial chamber maps aren't pointing you to the nearest trial chamber, they're just pointing you to a trial chamber. And I thought this might be a one-time mistake, like, oh, they didn't want to point to this one because some issue with the game or something like that, but then I decided to load up a few more of my speedrun checks. And every single time the game was telling me to go 500 to 1,000 blocks away when there were much closer trial chambers. In fact, I'm specifically now going to try and get a trial explorer map that is going to be the closest one, and as you can see, we have no such luck. All of these trial chambers are at least a few hundred blocks away because we're nowhere near the map itself, but do you want to know where the nearest trial chamber is on this seed? Well, if we type /locate trial chambers, it says that there's one 67 blocks away, but I think that really is underselling it because if we just go directly below the village that we're already in, do you know what we'll find immediately down under here? A dungeon, but also a trial chamber. Wow. There is a whole trial chamber here that the game just didn't think to tell me about. And so, fun fact, because Minecraft generates a trial chambers every single 400 by 400 area in your world, it could theoretically be at the very edges of that, but it means that you can never be more than 800 blocks away from a trial chamber if you are exploring 1.21 chunks. And so whenever a trial chamber is meant to be 1,200 blocks away, you know your cartographer is lying to you. There's just not a lot you can do about it. But technically speaking, even though the cartographer exists, chunk base is more accurate, but I would still recommend using the cartographer because it is in-game lore or whatever. It's fun to follow maps, but something important to keep in mind is you'd figure this would be just as accurate or as, you know, like chunk base or even the /locate tool, but it's not. It won't point you to certain trial chambers, and so you can't find all the trial chambers in your world by following these maps, and that's something which is crucial. So that is what you need to know about finding a trial chamber. Now let's move into the second category here, looting trial chambers. There are 6 different sources of loot that you can find inside of the trial chambers, and that's before you consider what mobs drop and stuff. This is an insane number compared to most structures which have 1 and sometimes 2, but today we're going to go through and break down exactly what you get from each one and how you can even tell them apart, because one of the most common questions about this update is why are there so many chests and why are they entirely empty? Confusingly, this is a thing that you could probably work out if every single chest was empty, but this structure actually has a bunch of chests which aren't empty and actually contains some of the very best loot, like diamonds. So how do you work out when a chest is empty or not going to be? How do you work out what you should break to get what you need? Well, let's give you a very loose guide today. So vaults and ominous vaults are obviously the two which you get from rewards from the keys. These are basically part of defeating the trial chamber more than they are loot you can take from the structure. I actually kind of like it. It means you have to defeat the structure to get them, but it means that all of that loot isn't as easy as go in and go out, and you can't use the loot from it to help you defeat the trial spawners because you need to defeat the trial spawners to get those keys in the first place. So although we could talk about the vaults, we'll talk about them later, and so instead we'll talk about the first 4 categories right now, and I'll start by explaining the difference between chests, other chests, and barrels. So barrels are found in these hallways for the most part only, and they contain fairly simple items. The most complicated thing you'll find in here are planks, or in some cases you'll be lucky and you'll even find some ender pearls. Very lovely. On the other hand, if you break pots, you're not going to get planks or ender pearls. You're going to usually get some variables. Emeralds and iron are the things that I usually go for. You've got a small chance of getting diamonds or of getting a music disc, but I use this as a way to farm some iron if I'm just a couple short of a shield and a sword, because in no time whatsoever you'll have enough for both of those. As you see, I've got already. So pots are really handy for getting directly useful things, plus emeralds. I would say barrels are useful for the bare minimums of crafting, so axes and wood, and sometimes you're lucky enough to get some ender pearls, and sometimes you get hanging signs, which I don't know what you're meant to do within a trial chamber. And then finally, we've got chests, and the answer to the big question of why are some chests empty is that these are specifically put into the trial chambers in multiple cases, in multiple places in some cases, and they are specifically put here to help you with inventory management. So this is because Minecraft knows they have far too many blocks in the game. I don't even have every single slab in my inventory right now, and yet it is full. So what I can do is I can store my unneeded slabs in here until later, and boom, now I have the ability to come back for them and deal with it later. This is something that obviously needs to be fixed, and obviously Mojang knows about, but for now, that's something. So how can you tell the difference between an empty chest, one meant for inventory organization, and one which has the goodies in? Well, if it's out in the open, it's usually going to have nothing inside. If it's a little bit more hidden away, like you can see right here, then you're going to have the good stuff from it. However, the chests that I go for mostly are not the ones with diamonds and cake, as much as I love both of those things. What am I, a woman? Are you allowed to make that joke in 2024? Anyway, the important thing to say is that these are the important things to me, but if I was to give a tip regarding this final type of chest, I would say that it is usually found in the offshoot rooms. So you want to be in one of these hallways specifically. These are the ones that have them. Walk through a door and then either go down a staircase, or if you're lucky, it's just right there. Sometimes you have to go down a hallway, but there's often a chest at the end. Oh, in this case, there's two. They can't both contain stuff, right? Wait, do they both contain stuff? Wow, I'm in luck. A diamond and some glowberries? But I love these chests because they can contain bad omen bottles, which is huge. It means you can skip the whole regular spawners part and move straight into ominous spawners, which is something I'm a big fan of. So, yeah, to summarize, I think to give you 4 tips right here, use a barrel if you need the bare minimum basics, some building blocks, or some wood to make a crafting table out of. Use the pots if you're looking to get a large number of emeralds and diamonds, and sometimes just other fun little goodies, as well as the pottery shards later if you feel like it. And then use the chests if you're trying to find the most valuable stuff for actually fighting. So a bad omen bottle, or a wind charge, or a diamond in some cases. And then use the 4th type of chest. Use these empty chests that you find in all the rooms to store your stuff in if you don't need it right now, but you feel like you need it in the future, unless it's full with slabs, in which case, I don't know, die, I guess. So yeah, with that said, now you know about the difference between the 4 types of loot that you can find around here. I think it is crazy just how many you can start to pick up when you really look at it. You can make a lovely staircase out of pots. That's what I start to do with them after I get bored. But now we should move on to how you can actually defeat a trial spawner, because obviously looting them is easy. It's like every other structure, but how do you get value from it? I'm glad you asked, actually. The trial chambers are designed to feel like a maze the first time you go through them, and so even though eventually you'll get the hang of it, the first few times you're in here can be absolutely terrifying, and so what I recommend doing is just heading to the middle, the place with the beds, and setting your spawn point first. That way, if you ever are overwhelmed, that's right, you don't even have to sleep in these, you literally just have to use a bed, and your respawn point will be set there, and that way, no matter what happens, you'll be able to spawn right near where your stuff is. A lot of people say they need to use keep inventory, because otherwise it's such a long journey from the death point until picking up your stuff, but you can make that issue basically non-existent by simply setting your spawn in the middle of the structure. You have this lovely door for safety, and so mobs won't ever follow you up there, but it means that now you're ready to fight the structure. Speaking of fighting the structure, I think knowing your enchantments is something really handy to know. There are 4 separate damage-based enchantments. There's Impaling, there's Bane of Arthropods, Smite, and Sharpness, and although Sharpness is a really easy one to use against most mobs, because look at it, you can literally just smash dudes like this, the truth is that you're actually usually a lot better off using Smite against undead mobs like zombies. Even with a mace which has just 5 base damage, Smite 5 and a critical attack will lead to 1-hit KO of any undead skeleton or zombie, which is really, really handy, and so that is a tip I would say know off the bat. But another really handy one that people don't think about is the fact that if you have access to friends, using them here can be very useful. So in single player, which is what I play most often, you will get 6 mobs per trial spawner. This is a fairly normal number. This is expectable for most of you playing, but when you add another player to your game, those 6 mobs become 8. However, there's now 2 of you fighting it, and so that's 4 mobs per player. And if you add 3 people, it's another 2 people, it's another 2 mobs, but that means 3.33 mobs per player, and basically this can continuously stack downwards. The more of you there is, the fewer mobs you have to fight per player, and although I recommend just getting into spawn killing if you can get to it, if you are taking down 3 mobs, you'll find it a lot lot easier than 6. And so if you can coordinate your friends well enough, this third tip is one of the most handy things that people just don't even think to mention. They think that the most important thing must be something about the right type of food, or it must be something, about going in at the particular right angle, but ultimately that is the single most important thing you can know. However, if like me, there are lots of things you'd rather do than play multiplayer Minecraft, if like me, you treat it as an activity that's there to recharge from hanging around with other people, then you might instead just appreciate this next tip here, which is use a bow. Bows are handy at dispatching most foes fairly easily because they will knock back enemies while also allowing you to attack at a distance. And so even baby zombies, these are the worst enemy you'll find for attacking with a bow. Even a baby zombie against a basic bow. This is literally one I just picked up from a skeleton. The most basic of bows, the least things going for it, is still going to allow you to take down every single one of them easily. Most other foes, especially skeletons, are much easier attacked with the bows because you can attack them before their range extends to you, meaning that literally it's just like picking fish out of a barrel. You can use wind charges if you really need to. I mean, I think this is a lot more fun than the bow, but it's not necessarily any better. But if you run out of arrows from these, then this is a good backup. Also, pro tip, you can use wind charges to break pots. Will you ever want to do that? Probably not, but I'm giving it as a tip right here anyway, just in case. Very, very, very handy stuff. But yeah, most of the time you're just going to need to know which weapon to use for which enemy, and more often than you'd expect, that best weapon is going to end up being a bow rather than anything else. Oh, speaking of a bow rather than anything else, Bane of Arthropods does have a very small modicum of use against specifically regular spiders, but since regular spiders are one of the mobs that spawn here, you might need to know that. Here is a list of every single mob that can spawn in the trial chambers. They're split into 4 categories, with only the breeze being guaranteed, and if we take a look at a spider right here, you can see that using Bane of Arthropods does have some use, whereas if you have a sharpness 5 sword, you're going to have to jump critical hit. Even Bane of Arthropods on an axe or a mace will allow you to one-hit KO without that. But that is the closest thing to a use I can recommend from Bane of Arthropods. If you are just looking to simplify your gear, then have a mace maybe with smite, or maybe just have a netherite sword with smite and sharpness, and those 2 things plus a bow will probably be enough. But if you want to really tech out, if you've got a spider spawner that's really giving you challenges, then that's something that will be handy. Oh yeah, next tip. The breeze is not an undead mob. It's not an arthropod, no matter how buggy, no matter how much he might bug you, and so as a result, you're going to have to keep in mind that sharpness is the best weapon for them. It makes such a big difference, and it's something I haven't been doing in my Let's Play world, but every single time I do, I'm like, oh, this is how things can be if you just bring a weapon purpose-built for the scenario. Because sharpness 5 is good enough at killing regular zombies if you get the jump hit on there, so something useful to keep in mind. Speaking of useful things to keep in mind, that has been beating the trial spawners themselves, but at this point you might be questioning, okay, so you defeat the trial chambers and you pick up some keys and maybe some ominous keys, but how do you 100% the trial chambers? How do you go from someone who is surviving this structure to someone who has defeated it? And I'm glad you asked, actually. But first, let's turn on RTX. Although, in reality, it's going to be deferred rendering because it looks way better in my opinion. Okay, I hope you're ready for this one because I am not. Here is some extremely dark deferred graphics. So this is meant for the surface where you can see a lot, but down here it just kind of looks a little dim. But if you wanted to truly experience Minecraft in its most beautiful form, this would be the way. Look at that light reflecting off the copper. It just looks so good. Speaking of looking so good, let's also... Oh, there's basically no extra light we can add to this room. It looks like this normally, but we turn on some extra features for graphics, and it's a very, very wild time. So with that said, now I think it's time to fight a spawner and raise the question of what does it mean to 100% a trial chamber. I think this is something we should address before explaining how to do it, because I think there's 2 main ways you can say you defeated a trial chamber. One of these is that you can say, like, well, I've done everything it's possible to do. Okay, here's a skeleton spawner, so switch out to the smite axe, and ooh, those are terrifying eyes, by the way. I think there are 2 ways to say you've defeated this structure. One of those is simply to say that you've gone through and you've done everything at least once. You've used all of the vaults, and if this is your goal, then what you should probably do is actually farm keys on the same trial spawner, and then just go from trial chamber to trial chamber, defeating them as easily as you can. However, if instead you want to have a goal which is to do the first thing, but as effectively as you can, if your goal is to defeat the trial spawners over and over again, then ultimately, even as someone who doesn't say that farming is the goal of Minecraft, I think that in the trial chambers, it sort of is. To truly defeat the structure is to neutralize it as best you can, and so that means either destroying the structure or making it so that every spawner that comes in has almost pre-defeated itself. This is something I effectively did in my Let's Play world, funnily enough. I have 0 hearts, and yet I am alive. I do not know what bug has caused this, but I'm just gonna leave this now and slide off back to the non-preview. I'm gonna wake up tomorrow and this is all gonna be behind me, I'm sure. I've been in the process of destroying my trial chambers, which originally looked like this, and now they look like this. As you can see, it's mostly just the box that it came in, but one of the fun side effects of this is that now all of the skeleton spawners are actually up in midair, which is a problem when they end up spawning directly on it, but most of the time skeletons don't spawn directly on the spawner and instead spawn a little bit around it. And so if I defeat a few skeletons here, you can see that they're actually spawning and falling almost to their death. They're at least taking a large amount of damage from it, which makes it very easy for me to come and finish them off. This is a very fun thing that you can have as an end goal, because if we just make that pit a little bit bigger, then we can lead the skeletons directly to their immediate doom, something which just sounds so fun and tickles me so much. I really don't recommend destroying these little corners here because it's leading to all sorts of issues. So here is a skeleton spawner directly above the air. As you can see, the skeletons will spawn in and just immediately take damage. Oh, there's skeletons from elsewhere here. They'll spawn in and they'll immediately just take some damage, which is actually pretty darn fun, if you ask me. And so I think that this is another way you can say defeating a structure works, is if you make it so the only threat that's in there immediately spawns down and takes damage, or even better, dies. You can use lava or anything else to prove that. I think that if you could say you've gotten every single armor trim, every single level of bad omen, every single type of trial key, that is just 2 at present, each of the banner patterns, every single pottery shard, and then every single enchantment, I would say that you have defeated not just the tricky trials, not just the trial chambers themselves, but arguably the tricky trials in the grander sense of the word, as in the update. I think you could say that you've completed 1.21 as much as one can complete an update in Minecraft, and so that seems like a valiant goal to me. If that's not your goal, then maybe you could say, something even more broad, but I think now, to summarize the video together, 1, would you like to see me destroying a structure? Because if so, 4 parts are available right now, and the 5th and final is coming this week. But to summarize in a way that isn't just an ad for other ones of my videos, which, let's be honest, that was a shameless plug that I needed to get out of the way. I sometimes feel like I'm crazy when I destroy the structures, and your presence makes that feel better. But more seriously, I think that in a similar way, I think a lot of people wouldn't realize that you can just make a spawner spawn above nothing, that you can dig a big hole below it to make it easier to kill. I don't think a lot of people do realize that you actually need to have different enchantments for the first time in a very long time, making it kind of actually fun to balance which enchantments go on which tools. And I think a lot of people don't realize that in the trial chambers there are so many different pieces of loot for so many different scenarios, but ultimately I think the takeaway that I have after spending dozens of hours in trial chambers, after taking down hundreds of separate ominous spawners and dozens of ominous vaults, I think the key thing that I take away from this update is that the trial chambers are a mid-game structure that work a little bit in the early game. You know, if you have bare bones stuff and some gumption, you can get some stuff done, and that work a little bit in the late game, but are really meant for that mid game. And so if you come with a lot of stuff, you might actually have an easier time than you're expecting. And if you don't, maybe you can use this to learn how to have an easier time in the game in general. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I think for my overall retrospective of the trial chambers, I would say that this is a really fun structure, and it's one that I'm almost sad to be destroying, but definitely only almost. And yeah, otherwise I hope you enjoyed this, because I'll see you next time. Goodbye!